Hello and welcome to the NIGP webinar, Beyond COVID, the Long-Term Impacts on Procurement. Today's webinar is being brought to you courtesy of Negometrics. For those of you who have attended NIGP webinars in the past, you know that from time to time we ask someone from outside NIGP to provide their expertise and unique insight into an important issue we want to highlight to our audience. Across the years, those experts have represented both the public and private sectors, academia, and the nonprofit communities. All webinar content is presented strictly for educational purposes only and is not intended to be an endorsement of our speaker's organization, products, or services. Today's webinar is being presented by Darren Matthews and Zuli Milian and moderated by Steve Isaac. If at any time during the webinar you need technical assistance, please let us know in the Q&A box. During the presentation, you may submit questions to the Q&A box on your screen, and we will take them during specified parts of the presentation. Steve, would you like to go ahead and get us started?
Sure. Thanks so much for the introductions. Hi, everyone. My name is Steve Isaac. I am the marketing manager for Negometrics, and I really appreciate y'all joining with us today. We're really excited about this session. Before I jump into some quick intros for Darren and Zuli, I just want to say that as mentioned, y'all will be moderating that Q&A, so feel free to submit your questions. I'll be jumping into the conversation and introducing some of those questions as we go. If I don't get to your question during the session, we'll have some Q&A at the end, so we'll run through them there. And if by chance we don't get to your question there, we'll make sure we follow up with an answer and to continue the conversation after the fact. So thanks again. Make sure you put in those questions. So for some quick introductions, there's a couple of familiar faces for many of you, I imagine. I'll start off by introducing Darren Matthews. Darren serves as the chair of the Procurement and Supply Chain Management Program at University of California, Santa Cruz, and is the director of West Coast Operations with Negometrics, an international leader in digital procurement. He's a fellow of NIGP, a certified public purchasing officer, and a certified professional in supply management. He spent over 25 years in the procurement world with experience as the chief procurement officer of UCSC, Portland State University, and Portland Public Schools, and formerly served as a president of NIGP. Hey, Darren.
Hello.
When you registered, you might have noted that we were planning to be joined by Mike Thornton from the city of Leesburg, Florida. He couldn't join us today for a personal matter, but we're really lucky to be joined today by Zuli Milian from Orange County, Florida. Zuli is currently the assistant manager of the procurement division for Orange County, Florida's government. She holds a graduate certificate in public procurement, a bachelor's degree in business administration, and is a certified public purchasing officer, a certified professional public buyer, and a Florida certified contracts manager. In 2018, Zuli was named Procurement Manager of the Year in Central Florida and was awarded NIGP's Young Professional of the Year Award. And we're really happy to have her joining us for today's call and to welcome her expertise in this conversation. So without further ado, again, please submit your questions, but I'm going to kick things over to Darren to kind of go through this presentation with us today.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the intro, Steve, and welcome everybody. So glad you could join us today. And Zuli, so nice to be working with you. What a pleasure. Mike is great as well, but I feel like we didn't miss a beat when you joined us on this important topic. Now, the Young Professional of the Year, that's pretty distinguished. I don't think I'm in the running for that any longer.
Thanks, Darren. I'm really glad to be here.
Okay, well, thanks. So we'll be talking about some things. I'll go through the agenda here in just a moment. And we'll also pull in Zuli and her operation in Orange County, Florida, a large public procurement office. Does a lot of really good things. They've done a lot of preparedness. We're going to hear about that and get some insights kind of from the trenches, if you will, from an operational perspective, from the assistant manager of a large public entity. So Zuli, by the way, I was going to ask you, how is everything going in Florida? How are you and your family doing?
So we're doing well. We're growing accustomed to hunkering down. I have a 8-year-old son, so we have the challenge of kind of keeping him up to speed on his education, and also, you know, teleworking. My husband, he runs his own business, so we're we're not accustomed to all being in the same space, but I think this is a challenge that we're seeing across the nation, learning to share spaces and still be effective, from the youngest of the family all the way to the grandparents.
Very good. Glad to hear everything is going well. Yes, an adjustment certainly in our homes, our personal lives, not to mention the day job with public procurement, which we'll talk about today. Well, Zuli, real quick, I'm going to share a story that's one of my favorites. You and I were meeting a couple of weeks ago on Zoom, of course. I'm in Las Vegas and Zuli's in Florida. And your son very politely tapped you on the shoulder during our meeting as there was something in the kitchen that he needed to eat that was a little outside of his reach. And so Zuli, being the wonderful mother, took a break from our meeting and did that. So that was pretty cool. I've shared that with many of my colleagues. Zuli, hope you don't mind.
No, at least once a day, he does the gesture of, can I have a popsicle? Or he goes, Lunchable. Can I have a Lunchable? So, I mean, it's the nuance of doing business like this now.
Pretty awesome. All my children are grown and adults now, but I can certainly relate. Okay, let's take a look at our agenda. We've really kind of broken it down, this whole situation with our current COVID-19 pandemic, into kind of three phases, at least for purposes of our discussion here today. First of all, the immediate impacts and kind of the reactive change to the environment that was kind of put to us in fairly short order. Not a lot of notice, as they say, but I guess that's the way emergencies happen. And then kind of a section on informed, wide-scale adjustment. We have more information, we have a little bit more experience. What are we going to do in public procurement or in business in general in adapting to this new reality? And then towards the end of the presentation, we'll take a look at future change, including the use of technology. What are our techniques or practices in public procurement? How have they changed? How are they going to change? Are they going to go back to the old way? We'll talk about that. Definitely an opportunity for shared learning. And in a bit, I will talk to Zuli about her team, specifically in the area of learning, professional development, and the opportunities that are presented now, even during COVID. And then a little bit more about preparing for disruption. I don't think we can ever be entirely ready, but I feel that public procurement does a pretty darn good job in this area. And I think we'll see that with some of the comments from Orange County colleagues and how they prepare, not necessarily for the pandemic, but for other types of emergencies. Okay, so the first part here of our webinar, we'll talk about immediate impacts and reaction to change. Sometimes those are very, like I mentioned earlier, they happen quickly. And sometimes in public procurement, we need to think on our feet and be reactive as much as we'd like to be strategic all of the time. That's really not possible. And in this case, we have definitely had to react. So what we discovered in working with many public agencies, actually throughout the world and definitely here in the US, the shutdown, if you will, of government or shutdown except for essential services has kind of created a kind of a have and a have not environment, if you will. And I think that's in a number of areas. It's kind of a have and a have not when it comes to equipment or infrastructure, the ability to work remotely that many of us, if not all of us, are faced with. And also the haves and have not, things like, do we have computers that are needed? Do we have legislation? We'll talk about that. Do we have the regulations and the authority in procurement to operate in a different way to operate, whether it's digital procurement, bid openings, we'll talk about that. And again, we'll talk to Zuli about how her team is handling public bid openings. So some other factors that we kicked around. Was the procurement staff equipped to work from home? Now I've seen, and Zuli, I'll be interested in your take on this, but what I've seen is it's kind of all across the board, including places that I have worked. Some, the work from home was viewed very negatively, but I can tell you, being involved in the University of California system for several years, that was actually encouraged, promoted, and enabled. For example, we had strategic sourcing managers that worked technically for the Office of the President in Oakland, California, but they actually reported to work in either from home or at the San Diego campus. That was not unusual. So I'm not saying that for the UC system, COVID hasn't been an impact, but I think that's an example of an organization, that may have been more ready than others. Your thoughts on that, Zuli?
So our organization historically treated working from home almost like they treated misconduct.
Okay.
There was a zero tolerance policy for requests to work from home. And there was no telework arrangement. There was no remote work at all. So that created some very particular challenges for us when we went from the perspective of we can't trust people to work from home. We don't know what's going to happen if they do, because there had been so much resistance for so long, to having to shift gears and to say, wait a minute, this is a necessity now, and we have to change our perspective on this. And in fact, you know, I'll share with you a little later that we've achieved some awesome results as a result of embracing the technology.
Very nice. Yeah, I happen to think that Orange County, Florida is an excellent case study for all of us. This reminds me a little bit, Steve, of the podcast we did with Rick Graham, the chief executive of NIGP, a couple of months ago. Actually, it was our first podcast, and he talked about NIGP and their role, their position, their investment in infrastructure and technology to allow remote work, including work from home, to serve the membership here in the US, Canada, and some international members. So they were actually, again, an example of an organization that may have been more ready than others.
Yeah, I definitely think he brought this up quite a bit on that conversation, with the context of, you know, the NIGP membership, but also NIGP itself. And I think, you know, this is a fairly universal across the board experience. Organizations across all industries are at very different levels of preparedness for something like this. And, you know, especially in the immediate, you know, jump off from the beginning of COVID, you know, some of those differences were exposed.
Okay, well, thank you for your insight. We'll see, I think, the success of NIGP and the technology space that they work in remote as we host the first virtual forum. We'll talk about that in a little bit. As we all know, we were set to meet up in Chicago and had a kind of a feeling that that might not occur, as much as I love attending the national conference and networking with all of you. That'll be remote this year. And again, I look for good things to happen with the virtual forum. Okay, then another area of technology, this is the business, the technique, the kind of the how-to in public procurement. Is there a way to receive digital offers, bids, proposals, quotes? Are we set up for that? Also, along with RFPs, of course, we have our colleagues throughout an organization that we need to collaborate and communicate with during proposal evaluation. How can we do that? Do we have things in place? In my 25 plus year career, I've kind of seen the whole spectrum, where entirely paper-based operations, I've been a part of that, kind of the traditional historical part of public procurement. And in later years, worked with organizations like Portland State University, University of California, that were quite progressive in this area with the use of technology in the procurement process. So just always interested in what folks are doing in this space. And in some ways, I think the pandemic has kind of called our hand a little bit in this area. And then the last item there, external legal factors in your state that prevented true remote work. Are there, obviously we are a regulated industry, if you will, whether you're at the federal, state, local, special district, higher education, you have the rules and regs you're familiar with, and we follow those, we adhere to those, we have a high level of ethical conduct. So you need to follow the regulations, but you need to have them in place that allow this. Now, Zulia, I might put you on the spot just a little bit, because I know that, in Florida is known as a very, it's regulated, but it's very well regulated in public procurement. Things like public records, sunshine laws, public meeting laws, public bid openings, which I believe are considered a public meeting. So Zuli, how have you wrestled with this last part as far as the legal regulations and the legal ability?
So we've had to adapt. Fulfilling public records in a remote setting has been a bit of a challenge. Sometimes that means pulling records from a warehouse, having them scanned. So it takes a little bit longer. We had undertaken a paperless initiative before COVID-19 struck in November. We're so thankful that the timing of that was just right. So we have a lot of our records on hand. So that's helpful on the public records front. On the transparency front, we have laws that require public bid openings, that require certain public meetings. And so thankfully, the governor relaxed some of that, but didn't totally make that go away. So on the public meeting front, we're able to hold meetings 100% virtually, but for public bid openings, we don't have that flexibility. While the statute requires us to only do public openings for construction, our ordinance was overly enthusiastic and said that we were going to do public openings in a physical space for everything. And so what we're doing is, in conjunction with some staff on site, we're doing a public opening over WebEx. And it incorporates some paper copies, which are starting to diminish because we're discouraging that to an extent. We can't 100% prohibit people from submitting paper copies just yet. We're kind of working through the legality of that. But we are doing a virtual opening of a digital vault over WebEx. And so we've found creative ways to still adhere to the law while embracing technology and really maximizing and leveraging resources. We've had to research new ways to do things and also figure out what technology we already have in place that we can use to achieve our objectives.
Great, and I love that. And I'll remember that statement. You're using creative ways to follow the regulations. So good stuff, good stuff. Okay, we have our first polling question. We just want to get a sense from the audience. Are you currently performing the majority of your procurement work from home? What's going on out there? We'll give you a few minutes to answer the poll.
Just another second. We got a lot of folks coming in, a large percentage of folks answering, and I'll share the results in just a second. All right, I just stopped it and shared those results. Darren, are you seeing those results?
I am. It's popped up. Let's see. We'll have two polling questions in the webinar. This first one here: are you currently performing the majority of your procurement work from home? 66% of our attendees have answered yes to the question. So that's 2/3, and the other third are saying no, they're not performing the majority of their work from home. One of the things that I have heard of, Steve, is kind of a combination hybrid, which we'll talk a little bit about later. Some agencies are working remotely completely. Some are going in as essential staff members, say for emergency operations. Some are alternating who goes in, but they're keeping their distance. And I believe that in the 2 or 3 instances of colleagues that I've talked to, they're distancing in the office if they're working, and they're also wearing a mask all day.
Yeah, and some of the comments coming into the chat are also indicating that a lot of folks, the answer has changed over the last couple of weeks depending on where they are. This is obviously a really fluid situation for a lot of people.
It is, and I look at some of the national reports in the news. I follow like everybody else, and when I look at different parts of the country, I think, okay, who are my NIGP colleagues in Alaska, for example, Washington State, Texas, and how are they impacted? Along with the economy, the public procurement is a big part of each of our local and regional economies. And so, yeah. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, we're getting some comments in the Q&A as well, commenting that they're, doing a lot of work online, potentially using an e-procurement system, but they have to handle RFP meetings and construction meetings are still face-to-face. Some folks have leaned on some of their colleagues who have experience working from home in the past because they never were able to do it. So there's definitely a lot of differences here, and it's interesting to see that.
Very interesting to see. Well, however you're handling procurement out there, Zuli, and I hope that you're staying safe above all things. I have seen, Steve, like at pre-bid meetings that are on Zoom that used to, like at a construction site or a walkthrough, a lot of interaction, a lot of handshaking, a lot of close together looking at plans or inspecting elements of the job site. That's not happening. There's social distancing, spacing. When there is contact at all, it's like an elbow tap. So yeah, things are changing. Okay.
One of the questions, sorry, Darren, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
One of the questions we had was, do we think it's a good thing for procurement to work from home totally and be totally paperless too? And I'll hand that back to you. I think, that's a tough question to answer. I think it depends on your circumstances quite a bit.
I think there's some merit to having procurement be a little more mobile, right? What we found is that having people stuck in an office with a desktop computer is probably not the best thing for our operation. So transitioning people to hardware that's more mobile will create opportunities for us in the future. But certainly there's a lot of value with meeting in person. There's a lot of value with negotiating in person, looking at someone in the eye and creating partnerships. And so some of that is lost in this setting. So I think it's a balance of not forgetting, what the good things are from meeting in person, but also embracing that we're a little bit more effective and a little more efficient in this setting too.
Interesting to hear that. I would agree with you, Zuli, that it is a balance, and I think my balance might not be the same as someone else's balance, and that's okay. Yeah, I think there's a place for both for sure. So let me take a look, go over here this real quick, some immediate impacts and the reactive change that we spoke about earlier. So just a couple of boxes in the haves and have-not, just some examples. The haves, solicitations can continue as scheduled if I'm prepared for this, remote receipt of bids, structures and technologies in place, remote collaboration. I for example, Zoom meetings to collaborate with my evaluation committee. And in some cases, and again, not to say that the UC does everything right, but the University of California has largely digital in their processes and leveraging technology and able to do the remote collaboration. In many cases, procurement who's working on a campus doesn't physically work near their customers in many cases of another part of the campus or a satellite campus or another UC campus on the other part of the state. So there's ways to do that remote collaboration. So I'll just leave that as an example. And then the public bid openings allowed, Zuli just gave us a great example of that. If my organization is not as prepared or I don't have those things in place, could include the postponement of bids and RFPs. I can't receive physically the offers if I don't have someone, say, in the mail room or in a bid receipt room or someone in my incoming freight department. Does my staff lack the access to digital tools, collaboration tools like WebEx, Skype, Zoom? I think it's a good time to be one of those companies because those have just become an everyday necessity for many of us. And then the remote public bid openings may be restricted. I know, Zuli, that at Orange County, you still conducted, even with the digital system, you still conducted and allowed for a public bid opening. But I think because of social distancing, you had to get a larger conference room. You had to borrow a conference room so that the contractors coming to the bid opening, which they're used to, could socially distance.
We did. We had to borrow the training room from our HR department, which is usually used to accommodate like internal trainings. So it's a room that fits probably 250 people, which is kind of overkill for a bid opening. But we wanted to ensure that we were following the CDC guidelines and we didn't know what to expect. And we had such a backlog of solicitations because we had postponed that at a certain point we had 50 solicitations postponed. And so we had to figure out how to get them back in the pipeline. Along these same lines, Darren, we're also trying to find ways to do the pre-bid conferences in a digital setting. So we're using some creative tools on that side as well, incorporating videos and things of that nature to see how we can keep those solicitations in the pipeline when there are things that the vendors need to see in order to move forward.
Well, I'll be very anxious to see how that all plays out, Zuli. Thank you for sharing that. I know that for many of us who say buy in construction, and more, according to data and research in recent years, more and more public procurement offices are handling construction where in the past they may not have handled it. They have authority over that area of spend, which is significant, but that industry operates a little differently. For example, if I do an RFP for auditing services, the auditors want our business, the major auditing firms, but they're probably not going to come to a solicitation opening even if I have one. if I have something for construction related, there's going to be dozens of prime contractors and subcontractors, maybe union representatives that attend the public bid openings. I recall back at my days in Portland, which were not that many years ago, and we could barely hold, it was literally standing room only, and it was wall to wall with contractors on some of our large key projects. So how that's being handled today, that's a challenge. So, okay, Zuli, I want to talk a little bit about your organization, Orange County, Florida, the Procurement Department, and kind of a case study of reacting to change. So I'm going to throw some questions at you and let you share with our audience how you've handled the current pandemic. So first of all, how has the pandemic impacted your procurement operation in general?
So we spoke a little bit about how my organization viewed teleworking. So to say that we were kind of ill-prepared to telework would be an understatement. We had to deploy equipment. We had to examine our procedures to see what needed to change in order for us to do this effectively. One of the major considerations was that our ERP application was intended to supplement things that you physically do in the office. So everything was largely dependent on printing and signing. So we had to, in quick order, work with our IT department to do a major upgrade to a $25 million system. We just generally don't do things like that. An upgrade like that would have taken 18 months. We did it in a week.
Wow.
In order to get the system to give us PDFs to print, to allow us to route documents like purchase orders. Orange County is unique in that we have a separately elected comptroller. And so we were challenged to negotiate, right? Because we're under constant audit and they manage all of our security protocols. And so the pandemic hits and all of a sudden we're like, we need to be able to digitally sign. We need to be able to transmit financial instruments electronically. We need to reduce the capacity in the office. We need to mobilize. So not only does that mean, engaging in negotiations with suppliers, but also internally with other government agencies. We had to engage in that negotiation to establish security infrastructure that our comptroller was going to be comfortable with. So we were met with some challenges in order to do this effectively.
It sounds like it. And you may have touched on this already when you talked about the readiness for working remotely, but what would you say was the biggest challenge for you and your procurement team?
I think the biggest challenge was the hardware aspect. Everyone had a desktop computer, so we had to deploy people out with desktop computers and monitors in their cars for them to set up. When they got home, they had to set up a VPN. They had to set up internet proxies. What that means for us is that some of our staff is today, like many of our participants, I'm sure, working in really odd spaces. They're working in kitchen islands. Our staff has to work 10 to 15 feet from wherever their router is. So you just never know where that's going to be. So that was a major challenge for us, where we've been pretty fast moving with change and we're good with prototyping solutions. So we've been lucky in that aspect that our staff was really motivated to support us on that front. Another challenge we had was that we had zero infrastructure in place to accept electronic bids or RFPs. So like I mentioned, we had to postpone everything we had on the street. So what's a procurement office with no procurements? We couldn't advance anything. So in short order, we had to examine, and we paid particular attention to suppliers that were offering gratis options. And we had to see which option we could take that would allow us to have business continuity. And so we're thankful that we were able to secure a supplier to essentially be a partner with us, because we had to transition 50 active solicitations, and we were able to do it in a week. And we also had to, facilitate our public bid opening using that vault system that we were not accustomed to. But we were able to do it successfully, and we had our first bid opening was attended by over 100 participants of the vendor community and the media.
That's impressive and in a way kind of staggering, Julie, with 50 solicitations on the street, if you will. For some medium or smaller size organizations, 50 might be a year's worth of procurement. You had them all out there at once. So that's pretty amazing. So kudos to you and your team. Okay, as far as your organization, Orange County, how would you rate the preparedness of Orange County, Florida for the current pandemic? Were you ready?
So being a Florida agency, we're very accustomed to being responsive to natural disasters, right? We have teams available on the ready to staff our emergency operations center. We have protocols in place for hurricanes. So we're pretty aware of what needs to happen when we have an emergency. But this pandemic, I don't think anyone with even the best of tools could have reasonably prepared for something of this nature. We were in a particularly good place when the pandemic happened, and I hate to say a good place, but we had been in a place where we were iterating and really pondering topics related to emergency preparedness. We were going through the process of reaccrediting our EOC, our Emergency Operations Center. So that required a consultant to come in, and they had us ponder topics like, what would you do if you had no power? What would you do if you had no power for a month? How would you run procurement? What would you do if you couldn't communicate with your team? If you had 0 phones, how would you communicate? What would be your fallback? What do your forms look like? If you can't access your ERP application, how do you make it happen? How do you run your office, and how do you still comply with the law? Those are big topics to ponder. So we had to really sit down and think, wow, if I didn't have power for a month, and people have gone through this in Katrina and in other places, if I had to turn my operation over to another agency like a federal government and say, look, I can't run procurement, I don't have the resources, I need to empower someone else to do it, how do I do that? And so having pondered those topics, some of the resources that we put in place to handle those no power situation, no communication situation, no hardware situations, that served us really well during this pandemic, and we're using some of those resources, and we adapted some of those resources to get through this situation.
You know, Zuli, I've also served at times in my career on emergency operations, and whether it's the logistics or material management, that sometimes we refer to it as that. Procurement, as you and I know, is a very important part of that, any recovery effort. And I remember the scenarios for wildfires in California, or for earthquakes, or other types of emergencies like the ones you mentioned. I would have never guessed a scenario of a pandemic where maybe the operations team wore masks and had to do the social distancing, and a pandemic had impacted the country and the world. I would have thought that was like a sci-fi movie and not realistic, but here we are in the middle of it.
You know, we do have a question in our Q&A about what was the process put in place to handle a situation where you'd lose power for some long period of time.
So we established a procedure called a emergency field purchase order, EFPO. And it's a 3-part form that we print, and we have them locked in a safe. And in the event that we have to run our procurement office with 0 power, certain officials are authorized to execute electronic field purchase orders that have to be ratified once operations resume. So right now we're even using those electronic field purchase orders a bit in our emergency operations center, just to kind of ease the flow of PPE, because as you all know, PPE is something that you have to buy very quickly. And sometimes there's just not enough time to issue a traditional purchase order. So we're issuing those electronic field purchase orders. Sometimes they're handwritten. We engage in a robust and quick negotiation, and then we turn around and ratify that with a traditional purchase order.
A great question. Thank you for that. Robust and quick negotiation. I love it, Zuli. Okay, final question on this particular subject. Any lessons learned you can share with our audience, Zuli?
So at the county, we try to be innovative, right? We subscribe to saying yes, and we're constantly iterating, and we don't pretend that all good ideas are coming from a single source. So my recommendation to anyone in this situation right now, where you have to implement so many different things at once. We had to implement electronic bid openings at the same time as the e-procurement system, at the same time as the pre-bid infrastructure. At the same time, we had to establish electronic routing for red lines and bid reviews, is to empower your team and to really utilize those resources. We always say that when you're low on resources, you need to be high on enthusiasm, right? So you have to generate enthusiasm, have your staff buy in to what you have going on, and engage your staff as stakeholders. Because when we really look at it, we are prepared for this situation. We do have the resources, and we have partners at other agencies that are a network that we can use, just like this conversation that we're having now, to determine what best practices are and how to really advance things and how to share those resources.
You know, there's a question in the chat, you know, on sharing, you know, on the topic of sharing resources, asking if you would share that electronic field order form with some of the folks. So maybe Justin and the NIGP team can help with sharing some of those resources as well.
Absolutely, I'm happy to. It's a very basic form, but it gets the job done for us.
You know, but Darren, before you continue, I just want to kind of note, we've got a lot of questions in the Q&A, and really it's more of a robust discussion about a lot of the challenges people are facing and how those are really kind of distinct and diverse, maybe based on their circumstances. You know, for example, a comment on how essential federal personnel and military departments have to be physically present and how that can be a real challenge. We have comments talking specifically about in-person meetings and construction meetings, where folks are maybe experimenting with 360-degree virtual video technology for walkthroughs, things like that. So I think a lot of this is, you know, it's a lot of people in the procurement space really innovating and collaborating to come up with creative solutions.
Steve, I can say that we're also exploring the video walkthrough as part of our solicitation process. We haven't done it yet, but we established a process for video walkthroughs. And also we're doing unmanned, in a sense, walkthroughs where we just have someone from security personnel letting potential bidders or proposers in to look at a site, and they need to write down all their questions, and there'll be a virtual pre-bid later. But they independently walk the site, and they're just accompanied by a security guard.
Is there a specific platform that y'all were experimenting with the walkthrough videos? Do you know? That was one of the questions that just popped into the chat.
No, we even told our project managers to take cell phone videos and see if they could have a quality video with their cell phone. We talked about WebEx meetings where someone is live on site and they walk through and they can show anyone what they want to see using their mobile phones. So we're still walking through the logistics. We have, I want to say it's 6 different scenarios for how we could run a pre-bid. I cannot say we've executed all of them, but we have the framework established. And so for right now, the one that has been favored the most is the one where a security guard just lets the bidders and proposers in to look at the site, and we just have a debriefing and questions after the fact. That's not always possible because we operate a jail and some sensitive areas. Some of those sensitive areas we can't videotape. So we are still, one of our scenarios is still an on-site observing CDC guidelines with a registration that keeps admission under 10.
Okay. Well, thanks for the comments and the input. We really appreciate that. And it's great to see colleagues networking, sharing successes, and hey, we're in this together. How do we solve it? To the first point there, public procurement is resilient. We've seen that year after year with natural disasters and other emergencies that come up. Kind of brings out the best in all of you. And I think Zuli had given some great examples of that. But if you look back even at 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, the procurement community really came together. Someone had mentioned, you know, the importance of federal contacts, whether that's with FEMA, you know, military action, those types of things. So yeah, we pull it all together. So that's always been great to see. So just a few thoughts here, and then we'll move on. We've talked a little bit about collaboration tools. There's a few there that we mentioned, Teams, a Microsoft application, Skype and Zoom. Those are well established for collaborating just with routine meetings. I know that our company, Steve and I are using these literally every day to communicate, because you're not down the hall. As nice as that would be sometimes to have a cup of coffee with a colleague, we're doing it online. But I think it's also provided an opportunity to up the game, if you will. It has in my case. That's the improved technological savviness on both the buyer and the supplier side. So I kind of see this, Zuli, as the silver lining to this pandemic. It kind of forces our hand, as I mentioned earlier, on things like the use of technology. So the phone apps, the banking apps that I'm using now, digital procurement is part of that, of course, but so is just collaborating and talking to your team. And yeah, I've always thought this was a great area. I've never considered myself to be, hardly anyone calls me high tech Darren, but we're all able to learn new things. And I think that's, that's been helpful right now. And then the item that we talked about before is, legislative and regulatory readiness and ability to do our job remotely if we have to in procurement. And some of that could include even emergency legislative change. So Steve, do you want to share a little bit about what's going on in New Jersey?
Yeah, just for an example, I'm sure every state is looking at different circumstances, and Zuli's kind of touched on the circumstances in Florida. And just as a little case study, I think New Jersey's a fairly interesting case. Back in October, they actually issued guidelines to enable e-procurement or digital procurement. And they have a whole long list of requirements of an e-procurement platform in order for it to be utilized. But those guidelines didn't cover, bid openings, public bid openings. And as a result, folks couldn't be 100% online or digital as the pandemic hit. What they did is they adopted emergency rules specific for the pandemic that would enable folks to do public bid openings over Zoom or WebEx or other tools. Again, you can look through the statutes here and kind of see those restrictions. But one of the challenges is we don't know how long this is all going to last. And in New Jersey, for example, these emergency guidelines, my understanding is they're set to expire July 20th, which is, I guess, in 4 days. So that's a bit of a challenge. But, part of what we're seeing is that some of these reactive changes, some of these immediate changes are being codified into law. Darren, if you go on to the next slide, you'll see that, I kind of highlight, the next one you'll see, I'm highlighting that these guidelines included a concurrent proposed new rule, which would, live on forever. It would live on in the statute so that folks can continue to do these public bid openings beyond 4 days from now and beyond likely the crisis itself. And maybe that will really change the fabric of how procurement is done in New Jersey. I imagine a lot of states are seeing similar situations, but I imagine there's, 50 different stories to tell about this.
Sure. Yeah, if those of you out there, either at the local or state level, are seeing changes, I'd love to hear about those to help us enable to continue the business of public procurement. So let's shift gears a little bit to wide-scale adjustment. Not so much reaction, but time has passed, we have more information, but industry-wide, we're seeing some changes. Definitely the expansion of virtual learning, conferences, webinars. I mentioned earlier that the NIGP Forum 2020, for the first time in the history, and NIGP has been around since 1944, the annual conference will be virtual. So I'm going to be there. Zuli, are you going to be there? So I think that many of us will be in attendance. Hopefully I can catch up with many of you there. A lot of sessions that we're co-sponsoring with NIGP. So looking forward to that. I mentioned before kind of an increased technology proficiency, not just a literacy in technology, but proficiency we're seeing for all generations of workers. Certainly the current, if we want to call them millennials or the Gen X, and Steve, you know a lot about this as well. The technology, they've grown up in the age of internet. It's really an extension of who they are. My kids would fall into this category. It's a piece of cake for them. It's natural. It's not a stretch. But I'm also seeing, older workers in the workplace, including myself. Now, I'm not actually a baby boomer. I'm actually too young to be a baby boomer, but I call myself a barely boomer because I'm close. And yeah, the technology that we've seen advance over the years, we have to stay up. And now, maybe more than ever, I think it's really time to increase that technology knowledge. So procurement departments are experimenting. There's not one size fits all, as we discussed earlier. They're staggering in-office schedules to maintain distancing and real close contact, virtual working, virtual walkthroughs for construction bids, some of the technology that's going on that Zuli mentioned at Orange County. So there's just kind of a more informed adjustment. And I think, Steve, the question is, nobody knows this answer, but boy, when will the pandemic end? When can we get back to normal? And is there such a thing as, are we going to return to normal that I once knew as a public procurement professional? Again, not something that I can answer, but it's something that we each need to wrestle with, I guess. Okay, Zuli, I want to throw a few more things at you. We talked about, again, kind of maybe the silver lining in the pandemic is opportunities for training and development, not just with technology, but in other areas. Employee orientation. We just onboarded a new employee here at Negometrics, Charlene. Now she's in her first week and never met face-to-face with any of us. It's all being done virtually, remotely. She's a recent graduate of UCLA, so go Bruins. But those are the types of things that we're doing. But I'm always a big fan, always have been a big fan of professional development. So Zuli, let me ask you a few questions as it relates to your procurement team. So with the pandemic, how has professional development and training changed, or has it?
So for our professional development now, we had several classes on the books where we had slated to send some of our employees to take certain courses. Our budgets were limited. We were asked to not make any procurements that were not essential until the stability of the economy is a bit more known. And so right now we're relying on webinars and content that is included in our memberships. So we've asked our employees to at least take a webinar every quarter, to at least 2 a year, but hopefully every quarter, to make sure that they're keeping up with the content that they need to do their jobs. We're also providing training to them via WebEx, which is a bit of a challenge sometimes. There tends to be a bit of a silent majority sometimes on WebEx training calls. I feel like people may not be as forthcoming, especially if you're giving some transactional training or technical training. We get a lot of follow-up after. What is it that you said? I can't remember exactly. Okay. But right now, just like you, Darren, we have the challenge of onboarding personnel in a remote setting. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like right now. We've talked about how we synchronize new personnel with their colleagues, right? Because we want them to still have that experience. There are certain resources that we have in the office, so we have to think about, well, that thing that we have sitting on the bookshelf that we usually give, to someone their first week to look through. How do we get them acclimated, and how do we get them the information that they need? So I have no doubt that those resources will transition well to virtual, but it'll be a new experience because you don't just want to teach them tactical things. You want to ingrain them in your organizational culture as well. Okay,
interesting insights, Zuli. Thank you. With NIGP, of course, many trainings, in-person, traditional in-room classroom trainings were scheduled. A couple of those that I was slated to lead, including one in Miami, and I had to cancel that Miami trip when the pandemic broke out, and we did that virtually online. Some of the challenges that you mentioned, of course, you deal with that, and it's not quite the same, but I'm glad to see you're taking advantage of the opportunity. How about the topics for training, Zuli? Are there any you find particularly helpful during the pandemic?
So right now, training related to federal funding is particularly of interest to us. We have a large amount of CARES funding, which doesn't exactly have to follow uniform guidance, but we're trying to take that extra mile to ensure that we're spending it
Okay, looks like a little bit of technology glitch with Zuli's screen. So we'll wait for her to jump back on. Yeah, I think there's a lot of options out there, Steve,
And
for different.
certainly
Oh,
staff
I'm
has,
sorry, go ahead, Zuli.
can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Oh, I think, where did
Just
you
for a
lose me?
second, it froze, but you're good now.
Yeah, it said internet unstable for a second. I don't know. Um,
Yeah,
so we're
host
certainly
unstable, I don't know.
So we've certainly been interested in disseminating topics that help us increase safety, increase our efficacy, and make sure that we know, have the latest guidance in order to make these procurements happen in this setting. Additionally, the mental health aspect is not lost to us during this pandemic, right? People are stressed out, they're at home. So it's not unusual for our supervisors to incorporate something into their staff meeting, like a virtual tour of a museum or things like that. A lot of these resources that they've been putting together just to keep people busy at home, we've been incorporating into our workday just to kind of keep things flowing and say, oh, well, you know, at the bottom of the meeting, we're going to go look at the Louvre in France, you know, just to keep things light.
I love it. That's great stuff. Okay, how about, do you see this as an opportunity to increase proficiency with office technology? I think the couple that we've talked about are not just digital procurement, but working remotely using video conferencing applications. Is this an opportunity for your team to get better at that, Zuli?
Certainly. Our team we had to deploy these desktop computers across 5 counties. So our team had to learn how to set up their computers. You know, we have employees ranging in age from mid-20s to mid-70s. So that poses a different challenge sometimes for different generations and different proficiencies with technology. There's the digital natives that, like you said, it's not a thing. They just, you know, they just can connect these things, and some of us struggle a little bit with technology. WebEx meetings also, I mean, we've learned a lot of things that we would not have known how to do before. Establish internet proxies, establish those VPN connections, connect all these things. Additionally, we've learned a lot with our electronic routing of documents, right? We used to have what we called was the backpack brigade, which was you'd take all these paper files and you'd throw them in a backpack and take it home at the end of the night and go through red lines and go through contract amendments and just review and sign and red line and red pen. But we didn't realize the volume of what we were doing until we started routing these things electronically. And then we realized that in the first 3 months, we had routed 1,500 documents. And
Wow.
then we realized I was taking home 1,500 documents and not realizing it. So all of these new technologies are helping us to understand the realities of volume and the realities of being more efficient. And we found that not only are we more efficient, but people are happier because they can come in and know kind of what's coming their way.
Okay. A lot of cool things going on in Orange County. I love the museum tour. That's a really good idea. Before I ask you the last question, Zuli, just a quick plug to our audience here. We're currently working with NIGP on another webinar, and it's actually dealing with anxiety and depression, including things that might happen during this pandemic where we feel isolated. Not a topic you're going to see on a lot of procurement training calendars, but we think it's important. So look for more information on that. So Zuli, any advice to our audience members on professional development?
So concerning professional development, just like we are, I would just encourage you to remember what it is your organization does well and not forget about that during this pandemic. You know, if you have good synchrony within your team, do everything that you can to not lose that, even if that means hosting digital coffee breaks, find ways to continue your mentoring activities, find ways to continue encouraging staff to view webinars, if you can find a way to do them as a group and engage in group texting about the comments, about the content. You know, if you can link your professional development to that social aspect, for us, that's been a key that's made us successful in keeping staff encouraged and keeping them interested.
Yeah, I think that's important. And if we have a little fun along the way, then that's even better. Our company, actually, I'm on a social distancing committee. Even at a distance, we try social events every so often, get online with Zoom and play a cell phone game or handheld game. So, and then Steve hosted one on geography, and that's not my best topic is procurement, not geography. So I didn't do very well. Okay,
Darren, sorry, before we move forward, we have a couple questions in the Q&A for Zuli that I think might be good to just drop in now. One was, is Orange County still entirely remote? What does that look like for your team today?
So our entire buying section, our entire purchasing section for goods and services, and our entire construction, architectural, and professional service team is remote. The only people we have on site are support staff. So they're assisting us with things like getting the mail, getting things scanned to us. The on-site staff are on a 4-in-1 schedule, so they work from home once a week and they're engaged in a rotation. But we are still not 100% off-site because of those elements of that are physical. We still have to post awards on a physical bulletin board. That's written into our ordinance, so we can't get away from that until we modify our ordinance. Even under emergency protocols, we can't change that right now. And so there are certain things, public meeting notices still have to be posted in a public building. So we still need certain staff to help us with that. But other than that, we have our staff remote.
Got it. And we'll talk a little bit about more long-term impacts, but we have a couple questions on that. You know, do you get the sense that there's been an increase in workload on you or your team since being remote? Was there one up front, but that's lessened? How have you felt that this has all impacted workload for you?
So we support over 80 divisions. Orange County is a really large organization in that we have the second largest convention center in the world. We operate a jail, we operate a landfill, we operate health and human services, HIV centers, medical clinics. I mean, you run the gamut with Orange County, right? But right now we came into $247 million in CARES funding. So that has increased our workload. In certain areas like convention center, where we're not having any conventions, well, we've decreased our workload. Our museums are empty. Our children's programming is in high demand. Those contracts are not going anywhere, but we still have to engage in speculation on when are we gonna be able to do this. So those conversations and those contracts are still in the pipeline. So even if they're not advancing, the workload associated with it is still there because we still have to ponder, hey, that contract for after school programming, you know, the vendor's hesitant. What do we do? Are we even going to need this? So we still have to engage in that workload is still there for us. And certainly the PPE, we've had to man an entire EOC operation for 4 months.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot. I think kind of dovetailing on that, and there's a question in the Q&A, and there's a little bit of a chat going on right now about this, is efficiency while from home, and how efficiency is impacted and quality is impacted by working from home. We had a question, do we feel like our efficiency and quality has increased or decreased? It seems like some of the folks in the chat feel like they're more effective from home. And I'd love to get your take on that. We'll talk a little bit more about what we think is going to happen in the future in just a second.
So we've seen a very large increase in productivity, specifically in our buying section where our target is 10 days. And we usually achieve 8 days. So we're usually well within the target and usually pretty proud of our measure of 8 days. They've taken it down to 3 days. So they've become extremely effective at home. Do I think that that's permanent? I don't. I think that right now people are striving to prove. I think there's the value proposition of saying, I'm home, I'm effective, please don't send me to work. So I am going to work my hardest because for my safety, I need to be effective because I don't want this. They're still looking at it like an opportunity to be home, and it is. You know, it really is. Not everyone has the luxury of working from home, especially right now where we're concerned about our safety. I find that people are using what's usually their commute time to work. So if someone usually starts at 8 and they usually start their commute around 7, they're working at 7. Some others are unable to detach. And I think part of that element of having a desktop computer sitting in your kitchen is that element of not being able to disconnect. So they're putting in extra hours, which I appreciate, but I also don't appreciate, because there's the human element and we care about our personnel and we want to make sure that they're healthy, and it can become a little bit unhealthy to be so connected all the time. And so part of what we're doing is transitioning to laptop computers, using that CARES funding. That'll be really critical to us so that we can put our staff in more appropriate places so that they can balance a little bit. But yeah, I think if this were a permanent thing, I would expect to see a drop off, but I do think that we won't lose, you know, the efficiency that we've achieved. I think it would still be a tremendous increase in efficiency, even if it dropped off a little.
Got it. Thank you. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. So Steve, I've read a couple of articles, just because this is an area of high interest for me, that talked about best practices for kind of disengaging from work and separating, as Zuli mentioned. We are seeing increased efficiency. I totally agree with what she has to say on that. But also to be able to have maybe a designated spot at home, and then you physically leave that and you have time with your family or your friends or whatever you do when you're not working, that's important. Just I think the balance and the mental health things that we talked about. So I can certainly appreciate that. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about wide-scale adjustment. Certainly in electronic procurement or digital procurement, we've seen significant impacts. A lot of providers across the country have instituted programs and offers, free offers, you know, whether that's 60 days, 90 days, 6 months. You know, Negometrics is one of them, of course, but we've seen a lot of those, as I'm sure you have. In many cases, based on our experience, this has led to a greater adoption among buyers and suppliers. And just kind of a little fun fact that we'll share with you, is since the COVID started, the number of suppliers in our particular platform has doubled. So I suspect that's the case with other e-procurement providers. So just wanted to share that. So this is an interesting slide. Can the genie be put back in the bottle? Zuli, I'm gonna date myself a little on this comment, but back in the day, we used to track critical shipments in a manual process, pretty much through telephone, through distribution centers, trucking companies, supplier representatives, and then came online digital package tracking. And once that came, that was like the genie for us. I was working in materials management at the time. That genie never went back in the bottle. So I don't know. Do you think that's a fair question, Zuli? Can we go back to the way it was before?
I think you're right, Darren. I think you can't unring the bell. Once you advance in this way, I'm not going back to the backpack, you know? We're not doing that. And our suppliers, now that they're submitting things electronically and they don't have to haul through traffic or run, we've had people fall running up the stairs trying to get a bid in before 2 o'clock. If they don't have to do that, then, you know, it just, you can't reduce that service level now. We're providing electronic purchase orders now. We weren't before. Is the supplier going to wait 5 days for it to come in the mail now when they know that we have the capability to provide it electronically? Is our customer going to wait for interoffice mail when they know we have it electronically? They're not. So I think, you know, we've worked hard to put these things in on the fly, but I think they're here to stay.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's see, Steve actually led a little bit of a supplier research project here recently. So I'm going to ask him to just share with you a little bit of some survey results that there will be more of at a later time, Steve.
Yeah, that's right. On our end, on our own site, we'll be running a webinar about these results as we make them public. But, you know, having just finished this survey, I thought it was really interesting, you know, looking at the impacts on suppliers of these new technologies and of e-procurement technologies. You know, our respondents, 40% of them said they're more likely to bid if there's a digital submission option, as opposed to less than 5% who said that they're less likely to submit. that leaves about 55% saying it's neutral. But if you can, increase by 40%, that we found that to be a very compelling statistic and very interesting, especially given that, from folks who in the past have had some trepidation about digital procurement, one of their common comments is that their suppliers are a little scared of it. And we're finding that's not the case. We're finding that 42% say that they save a significant amount of money with digital versus paper bidding. Given that COVID is kind of changing these technologies, it kind of goes back to that genie. Can you put the genie back in the bottle? Can you unring the bell? It's kind of hard to imagine in some of these cases that you can. That, of course, extends beyond to e-procurement. There's a lot of advancements that come out of times of crisis and change. And some of those advancements, we're not going to want to go back from.
Steve, if I could speak to that, I kind of feel like in a sense, the e-procurement platforms create like an artificial qualifier too, right? Because that supplier who's resistant to making a PDF copy or filling out a form electronically might be the same supplier who struggles with invoicing because they don't know how to use, Excel or don't know how to use bookkeeping software. So sometimes that's a distinguishing characteristic among bidders, to really see how they respond to this and to really say maybe we want suppliers who have enough of an infrastructure in place to understand, basic technology.
Yeah, I agree, Zuli, and I guess I would add that I see digital procurement and digital commerce in general, including e-payables with government, electronic, contract payments, for example, that are more timely to a supplier. In a way, it kind of levels the playing field. And I've seen many small and diverse businesses, which I have always enjoyed working with, and I feel like that's an area we could all do better in diversifying our spend. But the small supplier is more apt to submit digitally rather than incur costs because they're the company CEO, the fleet manager, the IT manager, and the marketing manager. So they don't have a big staff to do all these things. So I think it's been a plus in many cases for small and diverse businesses. At least that's what I'm hearing. Okay, Steve, we ready for another polling question?
All right, I'll launch it.
Okay, get your crystal balls out. What will public procurement look like in 2021? So next year, work done remotely, kind of the majority of you are currently doing, primarily done in the traditional office environment or past practice. That's what I grew up with in procurement. Or the other option is some combination of the two. So we'll give you a few minutes to weigh in on that poll.
Still getting a couple answers in. All right, I'll go ahead and share these results.
Okay, so Zuli, can you see those?
I'll unmute. I can.
Okay, you have any comments on what our audience is telling us?
I concur. I can't vote because I'm a panelist. It doesn't let me, but I vote number 3 too. I think there's something, it can be a bit exhausting to just work from home. I think that, like we mentioned before, there are some elements that you want to have in person. There are certain meetings that are more effective in person. I think eventually that fear of being together has to go away. Of course, when it's safe. But I think the most effective arrangement would be a combination of remote and traditional and also mobile, right? We need to not be in our offices. We need to go visit our customers. And so with having that mobile hardware, for us to go out to places like the convention center and go out to the jail to meet with our customers will be really helpful to us.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think whether it's in a virtual world or when we get back to semi-normal, that, reaching out to our end users and our customers and visiting them at their place of business or staying connected with them at the very least is so important. I completely agree with you, Zuli. and so do 86% of our audience. That's
For us, that'll be a game changer, you know, being able to go see your customer and cut purchase orders and, you know, work on contracts, because we didn't have that capability before.
Okay, thanks for responding to our poll. Okay, kind of on the home stretch now here with our webinar. So let's talk a little bit about future change in the areas that I mentioned earlier: technology, the technique or the practices in public procurement, shared learning, and then being as prepared as we can for disruption. So future change. This was a quote attributed to Winston Churchill: never let a good crisis go to waste. So I don't know if Churchill really said that, or it might have been someone else, or he repeated it, but I think it's something to take at heart. It's a little cliche, I guess, as far as the quote, but it does talk about, you know, the different opportunities we have for change and to adapt and to react in a very positive way. And if we do, like our colleagues at Orange County, we'll embrace it because we have to. We know the business of procurement needs to continue, and we'll use that as an opportunity. And just with some of Zuli's examples, not just the digital procurement, but public bid openings conducted over WebEx, increased training for her team, the opportunity for them to advance their technology skills. So in that sense, Zuli, I think your organization has definitely heeded this advice that I see on the screen.
We sure try. We've tried to turn this into an opportunity to the greatest extent possible, and to put in meaningful change, not just temporary band-aids.
Okay, all right. Okay, here is another statistic on change and dealing with change, and on the topic we've been speaking of, and that's working from home in procurement, in public procurement. And you can see here, just a quick statistic here: 60% would like to continue working from home as much as possible. And a good share, though, 40% prefer to return to the workplace. And I think for a lot of the reasons that Zuli mentioned, that human interaction, public or you know, private interaction on a personal level with colleagues that we've worked with for many years, it's not quite the same over Zoom. So again, I think this reflects kind of the combination, Steve, that we saw earlier.
Yeah, I think so. You know, Darren, you and I have never actually met in person, so there is part of me that would love to meet you.
Okay, I just realized I've never met you in person. I feel like I know you really well, so that's great. Now, Zuli and I have met in person. We've served on different NIGP committees together, but I think we last were in the same room in San Antonio at a NIGP committee. So, but it's nice to work with you, even if it's virtual for now.
Absolutely.
So Steve, remind me of this, this data. Was this our survey?
This was not our survey. I believe this was taken from Financial Times, and they kind of surveyed, and they kind of broke this down further, I believe, by, you know, demographics. And, you know, certainly it did seem like from their information that there's more of an interest in sustained remote work from younger members of the workforce. But overall, there is this interest in this sort of fusion of remote work and in-person work that, you know, of course, for procurement will have ramifications, and, you know, for big cities, for economies, for the real estate markets is going to have significant ramifications. And it's going to be a very interesting thing to watch over the next several years as we kind of move into the next phase of this.
Yeah, it will be interesting. Last year, Dr. Steve Gordon and I spoke at our Arizona Regional Conference of NIGP. We talked about different types of workforce, how we need to work together with different generations, and how different generations tend to embrace technology a little bit more, want flexibility, input into their work, mobility, as Zuli mentioned earlier. I think those are all things from our current and workforce that's even in college now that will be filling those public procurement seats in the future. I've always am amazed when I work with students and young professionals and colleagues at the talent that we see out there in public procurement. And so I think our future is bright, even though we're in the middle of kind of a crummy situation right now. But the technology is certainly a huge piece of that. And yeah, it will be interesting to see what the future holds. Okay, let's talk a little bit about future change and then we'll open it up for any additional questions that we have from our audience. So this first point here, as far as impacts, procurement staff may be looking for similar benefits, benefits, working from home. Maybe those are regulations that or policies that allow for that, or some type of combination or hybrid approach to working at home on certain days and maintaining that work-life balance. But I would agree, in my experience, and I've been a manager over teleworkers for 2 decades. So Zuli, I did it even before we had to. And I always found that my employees were highly efficient. It's like they're proving themselves. So maybe they want to continue proving themselves. So I'm not saying I have all the answers or everybody needs to do it a certain way, but I just ask that we consider these things as we start working our way back to normal in public procurement. Supplier vendor contacts will be further dispersed. That's something that we've seen in recent years, both in public and private sectors, is suppliers that can perform work from other parts of the country, other parts of the world, maybe another state. But on the other hand, I think this is also a balance, Steve, and that we also need to consider using local suppliers that support our local communities, and not everything is an outsourced service contract overseas. But again, there's a balance there, but I think they will be dispersed. Okay, supply resource needs of a remote workforce, those are distinct. We heard a great example from Orange County on the use of something like a laptop, where I'm using a desktop in my computer to do my procurement work. Now, if I'm going to work remote, I need different things. I need some IT support. Maybe you need to have a better desk or an ergonomic chair if you don't have one of those at home, and take care of yourself. So the needs are distinct and different. Using technology, using phones or smartphones for collaboration. That's just the beginning. And then online collaboration tools, I personally believe will become a permanent necessity. Now, we use Zoom, Skype, and all these online platforms for communication even before the pandemic, but I think now they're part of our daily life. It's not, boy, how do I remember? I can't remember how to log into the Zoom application. It's always open for me right now because I use it so much with colleagues inside my company and outside colleagues. So, Zuli, any thoughts on the future change and impacts as it relates to our profession?
No, I agree. As far as the collaboration tools, we're absolutely become more accustomed to using platforms like Zoom and WebEx. And I think there's always that meme that circulates where you hear another meeting that could have been an email, right?
Okay.
I think right now, those meetings that could be emails are emails, and some of those meetings that could be, wrapped up on the fly are being wrapped up by WebEx. And I think we'll be a little more discerning with when we need to take the time to meet in person. And so I think we'll be a little more effective with our time in the future.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate the insights, and I appreciate you joining me on the webinar. Well, that's what we wanted to share with you all today. Again, we don't have all the answers, but we wanted to raise some issues that we're all dealing with during COVID-19 and what we might see in the future. We really appreciate the questions, the interaction, certainly weighing in on the polls, always good information. And Steve, I think it's always interesting. Data will always tell a story. It might not be my story or your story, but data tells a story. Just like the majority, or 86%, I believe, of our audience said, hey, it's going to be a combination moving forward. So with that, Steve, I'll turn it back over to you. And thank you. And I think Zuli and I are going to be on here for any additional questions or comments folks have. But so thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Darren. And thanks especially, Zuli, for jumping in with us. As you said, I really thought this was a great opportunity for people to kind of explore some of these issues that we don't have answers to, but it's really valuable to talk about them and talk about what we can expect to see and what we've seen thus far. For a little bit of context, again, I'm from the Nigametrics team. Darren is on staff at Nigametrics, and we are one of the e-procurement platforms that we've kind of been talking about. As we talked about, there's others out there, but for example, we help folks, build out their solicitations, their RFPs online, and help bring some of these procurement aspects to 100% digital space. So certainly after this, Darren's information, my information is actually on the next slide. So you can feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or you want to dive in. I know we have a hard stop at about 3:30, which gives us about 11 minutes. So if folks did want to drop any other questions into the Q&A, we can try to touch on some of those. Just to look at a couple of these, a couple for Zuli, and then for anyone. So when you moved over to virtual bidding systems, Zuli, did you offer assistance to small vendors? Did you have a lot of requests for support? How did that transition go for you?
So the solution that we put in place included customer service support. So what we did is our solicitations were issued redundantly. There was an announcement on our website for each and every solicitation that was disseminated, and it directed the suppliers to go to our partner's website, who was Nicometrics, and they were able to obtain support on how to register and how to advance their procurement.
Awesome. So this is a question that, we touched on earlier, some of the legislative challenges people are facing. What do you do about a mayor or a city council or a legislature that is, quote, stuck in the past, and they haven't done the work to enable the workforce to do some of this remote working? I know, Zuli, you kind of talked about thinking creatively around some of these issues. How do you manage this stuff?
So for us, we actually experienced this. We brought forward ideas on how to advance procurement, and it just depends on what administration is in place. And sometimes it's a hurry up and wait situation, but you have to keep moving forward. You have to keep trying. And so when the time comes, you know what's out there, you have the tools, and you have the expertise to do it. And so sometimes you have to wait for the opportunity, but when it comes, you'll be ready.
And Zuli, I'll just add to that it's an opportunity for procurement leaders like yourself, and I know you and Carrie are both there at Orange County and do a great job of this, having exposure to the high level and the elected officials and putting forth procurement recommendations for improvement, because you're the experts, just like your police department is the experts in public safety, or wetlands engineering will weigh in to them and give them advice. That's the evolution of procurement that I really have enjoyed seeing. And if they're willing to listen, maybe share what your peer agencies are doing, that can kind of help our cause and get those to the question, Steve. How do we convince some of them? But I think that's a lot of work to be done in that area.
Yeah. At our procurement office, we're lucky to have a seat at the table. I know that a lot of agencies are striving to achieve that, but we have a seat at the table and we're not letting it go. And so we've been engaged in a very strategic way across our divisions. And we have innovative leadership. Our mayor has actually appointed a chief innovation officer, because they are so in tune with being innovative, and he wants us to be the prototype community of tomorrow. The Epcot, so he wants us to be that community, and so we are striving to honor that culture, that innovation that they're trying to achieve.
Awesome. Another question, Zuli, on process, and again, I'm sure everyone has a different answer to this. Did you collaborate specifically with your IT department on helping you with some of these changes? There's a couple questions about, e-signatures, for example. How did you handle things like that, and, implementing some of this tech change?
So like I mentioned, we have a separately elected controller. So not only did I have to coordinate with our IT department to ensure that our solutions are ADA compliant and are that meet security standards, but we also have to adhere to the security standards of our controller's office. So it's an internal negotiation that we had to engage in to ensure that we select the solution that serves the public need and is in synchrony with our electronic infrastructure.
Got it. Sure. And I think one last question here, that is, some of the stuff we've already touched on as a procurement leader. What kind of activities are you doing to foster remote work with your team? We've seen some talk in the chat about Zoom yoga. Darren mentioned that on our team, we've done some trivia and geography bees and contests. And, in addition to, just kind of enabling with tools, what are some of the activities you've done to foster a remote remote work culture.
I saw that comment by Donna, and it amazed me. I'm like, Donna's my hero. She's doing yoga over Zoom. That's amazing. We are doing remote coffee breaks and things like that. We're making sure to communicate with our team. There's a series of text messages every morning just to say good morning. There are check-ins, those things that make our team great, that collaboration, that friendship. We're trying to not lose that. So like I said, some of our supervisors are doing like virtual tours just to keep things light. We even did an MTV Cribs style video where people showed off where they're working, and it was funny sometimes. Some people are just like sitting next to their stove, you know. But we did it. It made everybody laugh. So, you know, you have to stop. You have to keep it light. You also have to understand that people are going through this pandemic as well. Some of us are living our best lives, right? Some people are home and they're introverts and they're happy to be home. Some others are struggling. Those social butterflies are dying out there, you know? So we have to remember that people are gonna have different needs, and try to meet those needs, and try to remember kind of what their personalities are and how to help them. And also remember that some of them are gonna be impacted from a health perspective. They might have someone in their house who's sick. So we have to have that empathy and check in with them, and not just consider people as part of our staff and the utility of a person, but also, you know, that they're a person that has feelings and emotions, and that, you know, this is something that we're kind of all in the same boat. And even from a leadership perspective, to be honest about our emotions. When people ask me how my day is going, I have to say I'm struggling today, and not pretend to be, you know, above the pandemic, because they want to see a face that resonates with them, and they want to know that people are in it with them. And not every day is going to be great. Some days are really hard. Like I mentioned, I have an 8-year-old running around, and I want to have FaceTime with him, but it's difficult. So I think we're all navigating those things together, and we have to maintain that human element and that empathy.
Wow, well put. Zuli, thank you so much. It's a privilege to work with you, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And thank you to everyone who's joined us. I hope you all take care out there.
Thanks for the invitation. I enjoyed it.
Of course, thanks so much. And thanks again, everyone. I think we can kick things back over to Justin and the NIGP team just to kind of wrap up with a couple quick notes. But again, thanks everyone so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you, Darren, Julie, and Steve. I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar. Please take time to fill out the evaluation survey. A link containing the survey and a recording of this webinar will be emailed to everyone tomorrow. Thanks again, and have a great day.